Welcome, quiet listener. I'm your gentle companion now, ready to help you sink into soft, dreamy nothingness. Just quickly, don't forget to rate the video and join the channel for more nightly stories. Let us know in the replies where you're cuddling up and what time it displays. Plus, if there's a setting you'd like to explore later, I'd certainly like that idea too. I always thought Christmas would feel different since I became a mother. Warmer, simpler, maybe even miraculous again, the way it was when I was young. But frankly, the holidays usually made me uneasy. Money was always tight, and working part-time at a small dental office in Cedar Hollow, Wisconsin barely covered bills, food, and whatever my 5-year-old son Julian required. Cedar Hollow wasn't a large city. Practically everyone was acquainted, unless you lived on the far outer edge of town, like I did in a small single-story structure my grandmother bequeathed to me after her death. It rested on a hushed residential road populated with older folk, front porches adorned with strands of white lights, and lawns already powdered with initial winter snow. It wasn't luxurious, but it was safe, and it was the one stability I didn't have to worry about. Just before this incident, it was Christmas week. I was 27, juggling my job, home, and being a single mom, a role I was certain I would continue alone. Julian's father had vanished before Julian reached 2. I didn't care. He was not a good partner, and he rarely even attempted to be a father. But Julian was the reason I existed. Expressive, silly, eternally curious, and agonizingly sweet. That specific day, I had a day off. So we traveled to Willowgate Mall, which was the biggest shopping center within 30 miles. We had shopping tasks to finish. Presents from my mom, my coworkers, and a tiny trinket from my neighbor who constantly brought us treats. Julian was practically bouncing with excitement in the back seat. "Mom, can I get a hot chocolate when we are done? The kind with the tiny white marshmallows. If you don't misplace your mittens this time," I joked, peering in the rearview mirror. "I won't. I swear. I promise with my pinky." He jetted his finger toward my shoulder from the back seat, and I giggled and stretched back, connecting mine with his. Small joys like that made everything worthwhile. We parked by the south entrance. No, the closest one to the large food court. Holiday music was playing through exterior speakers, and the huge wreath above the sliding doors glowed with blinking red and green. Inside, shoppers moved slowly with massive boxes and bright red bags. A winding queue stretched toward a small photo booth, where waiting children were hoping to pose with Santa. "Mom, can I visit him, please?" Julian tugged firmly at my hand. "The one in the official booth? The line's too long, dear." "No, not that one. The man standing near the doors." "Music," he waved at me. I looked. Truly, a Santa, but definitely not the mall's official one, stood by the row of fake plants near the wall, lightly shaking a small brass bell. His costume seemed cheaper than the one utilized in the professional photos, like something sourced from an online shop. His beard was obviously synthetic, but carefully combed. The red coat was large and loose around his middle, and the black belt hung noticeably crookedly. Still, he looked completely harmless from a distance. "All right," I said, "but we'll keep it short." "Yes." We walked quickly over. The Santa's face brightened instantly. "Well, hello there, little man," he boomed, dropping to one knee, so he was at eye level with Julian. "What is your name?" "Julian," he brightly chirped. "That's a very strong name. What do you wish for Christmas this year?" Julian leaned in close to me shyly before quietly whispering, "A Supernova handheld game, the new blue one." Santa let out a soft chuckle. "That's one of the most popular toys this holiday, buddy. You'll need to be extra good, understood?" "He's always good," I said with a warm smile. "Well, mostly." Santa glanced sharply up at me. His eyes were intense. Far too intense. A strange look formed beneath the beard. "You've got a handsome little boy, ma'am," he said, "and a lovely mother, too." I felt my cheeks blush slightly. Not genuine flirtation, but the simple awkwardness of accepting a compliment from a perfect stranger in a cheap costume. "Thank you," I said politely. "It's a tough time of year, isn't it?" he continued. "All the shopping, the baking, keeping little ones happy and entertained, especially." His eyes dipped lower to my ringless left hand, especially when you're doing it completely solo. I froze. I hadn't revealed that. Perhaps he just made an assumption, but the specific way he phrased it, like he had some prior knowledge, unsettled me greatly. Yeah, I replied shortly. Something like that, indeed. He leaned even closer, dropping his voice a little more. Well, if you should ever need some extra assistance, Santa's always very ready to help. I forced a small, brittle laugh. Right, of course. Then he abruptly shifted the topic of conversation. Do you know the holiday song? I saw Mommy kissing Santa Claus. Julian grinned widely. Yeah, my whole class performed it. Oh, really? Santa turned to me. I suppose we could make that exact song come true, couldn't we? He tapped his cheek lightly. Go on now. It's an old holiday tradition. I was fully prepared to give a small, polite, little peck on his cheek. Nothing weird intended, just to be courteous and quickly end the uncomfortable interaction. But as I leaned in, he turned his head incredibly fast, attempting to meet me directly on the mouth. I jerked back instantly. Whoa, no, absolutely not, sir, I said sharply. Santa let out a sudden, rough laugh. Not joyful, not welcoming. More like he found some pleasure in my sudden discomfort. Ah, come on now. It's just Christmas fun. Don't be so shy. Mom, Julian whispered softly. We're leaving, I said and firmly grabbed my son's hand. Have a nice night. As we walked quickly away, he called out loudly, Merry Christmas. I didn't look back behind me. At home, we got quick takeout food, drove back, and unloaded all the bags. I tried hard to shake the unease away. After all, strange men are everywhere, especially around Christmas, when people work tiring long shifts and get moody or weird. I made sure to lock the front door, kicked off my boots, and turned on a Christmas movie. Julian curled up tightly beside me with his favorite blanket, and for a little while, it felt cozy again until the doorbell music rang. 1, 2, then 3 quick times. It was almost 9:30 music p.m. Nobody ever came to my house that late. Julian sat up fast. Who could that be? Stay right here, I told him firmly. I approached the door very slowly, my heart wildly pounding. Who is it? I called out. A man's voice, very low, muffled by the wood door, replied. It's Santa. My entire body went completely cold. No, I said clearly. If you're the man from the mall, you need to leave right now, or I'm immediately calling the police. You seem to have dropped something from your shopping bag, he said clearly. I'm just being helpful and returning it. What exactly did I drop? I called out. I'm not sure, ma'am. I wouldn't try to peek through your belongings. If you just open the door, I can hand it to you. Leave, I snapped now. No reply came. Just silence. I called mall security to register a complaint, hoping they could make him leave. But the woman who answered the phone said something I will never forget completely. Ma'am, we do not have any mall Santas walking near the entrances. Only the official paid photo booth one. Whoever you spoke to is not employed by us. My stomach twisted suddenly and violently. When I hung up the phone, everything felt terribly wrong. I checked the kitchen window, lifting the blind just slightly. Outside, the dense darkness pushed hard against the glass. Then, from somewhere near the dark driveway, a loud, clear, mocking laugh. It sounded drawn out, mocking, like he knew completely I was watching him. I froze instantly. Then, I forced myself to do the one sensible thing I could. I called the police immediately. 2 uniformed officers arrived within 10 minutes. They walked slowly around the entire house, shining their bright flashlights into the dark corners of my yard. They were unable to find him. You definitely did the right thing making that call, one officer assured me firmly. We'll patrol this whole area tonight. It provided a small comfort, but not enough. The second terrifying incident happened a few nights later, around 11 p.m., when Julian was sound asleep. The doorbell rang loudly again. One long, continuous press, then complete silence. I turned the TV off immediately and completely. I didn't dare even breathe. The doorbell did not ring a third time, but I didn't go downstairs to look until the sun had come up. When I stepped outside the following morning, A single folded piece of paper was taped firmly to my front door. The text was typed neat and felt cold. I didn't even have to unfold it completely to feel my stomach muscle tighten with fear. I brought it quickly inside, unfolded it with shaking hands, and slowly read. I'll just be direct and honest. I'm sure you know who this message is from. I truly didn't intend to frighten you. I had a long, tiring shift, and a truly beautiful woman talks to me. It's kind of difficult for a guy to behave normally. You and your boy are the absolute cutest pair I've ever come across. I'd sincerely love to be a part of your sweet family sometime. You sensed a connection, too. Don't pretend otherwise. I know exactly where you live now. I just really need your number. Text me when you're ready to talk. Let's make plans for something fun after the holidays end. I apologize if this all sounds a little creepy. I just always go after what I ultimately want. Merry Christmas, beautiful. TR. His personal phone number was clearly typed at the bottom. I didn't sleep at all that night. I called the police again the very next morning. They told me a professional detective would be officially assigned. 2 days later, I finally got a call saying everything had been properly handled, and if he contacted me again, I was to report it immediately. He never did contact me again, not once, but I never forgot that day. I never forgot the way he said, "Beautiful mama," or how he aggressively leaned in. His sharp eyes trailed over me like he'd already mentally claimed something. And every single Christmas season since then, anytime I hear distant church bells or a cheap Santa costume rustling loudly near a store's main entrance, my chest tightens up suddenly, and every hair on my body stands up. Because some people wear costumes simply to bring joy. Others wear them deliberately to hide their dark intentions. And that year, Santa wasn't planning on giving any gifts. He desperately wanted to take something. Something he truly believed was already completely his. I was 6 years old the year everything shifted. That year, Christmas stopped feeling like a lovely holiday and started feeling like something with sharp, cutting edges. Back then, we'd only been residing in our new house for a matter of months. A large, old red brick two-story on the border of Fairview Heights, a silent Missouri community where people still offered a brief wave at each other from their own driveways and kindly borrowed sugar when they ran out. My parents, Nora and Julian, purchased a home because they claimed it had true character. I didn't know what that even meant back then. All I knew was that my bedroom finally had adequate space for my small TV, my favorite Lego sets, and the simple collection of action figures I carried everywhere with me. My older sister, Harper, was 9 years old and possessed that bossy older kid attitude, the kind that made her act like she was at least 25. She and I were Christmas fanatics in a way only very young children can be. We'd carefully count down the days on a long paper chain we hung in the main hallway, tearing one colored ring off each morning like it was a vital countdown to hidden treasure. But the house itself, the whole house already made me nervous sometimes. Not in a traditional haunted house way. Nothing supernatural, just incredibly new. Too quiet. Too large at night. The distinct kind of silence where you can hear every single floor creak. Fairview Heights was the comforting kind of place where Dad shoveled snow promptly at 7 a.m. while Moms warmed up cars and matching bathrobes. It wasn't a place where anything frightening happened. That's precisely why nobody ever locked their doors. That catastrophic mistake nearly tore my family apart forever. I'd been too wildly excited to sleep again on Christmas Eve. Every single year, my mom would always tell me, "If you don't sleep, Santa absolutely won't come." But I always had to push the boundary. That particular year, iMusic was busy playing Crash Bandicoot on my ancient box TV, wrapped up under a warm blanket that smelled exactly like strong laundry detergent mixed with my childhood. The bright glow from the screen lit up my room just enough that I didn't even need my nightlight. Around the strike of midnight, my bladder finally forced me to pause the game. I turned the volume way down until it was barely audible. My mom had an uncanny sixth sense when it came to me being awake on Christmas Eve night, and she'd get genuinely irritated if she caught me sneaking around. I opened my bedroom door very slowly, the freezing hallway air shocking my bare skin. That winter season had been unusually brutal. Everyone in town agreed it was the coldest since the year 91. I tiptoed quietly toward the upstairs bathroom. Everything felt entirely normal, silent, pitch dark, and peaceful. I had absolutely no idea that by the very moment I returned, my whole life would change forever. After finishing in the bathroom, I cracked open the door again, and that's when I clearly heard it. A soft, recurring, rhythmic rustling noise, like someone gently shaking the low-hanging branches of a fresh Christmas tree. At first, the most wondrous thought flashed quickly through my head. Santa. I wasn't completely stupid, obviously. 6-year-olds are much more perceptive than adults typically think. But something about Christmas causes even very logical kids to believe in magic for just 1 second. The rustling noise came again, and that's when my intense curiosity won out. I tiptoed halfway down the main stairs. My small hands gripped the wooden banister tightly. The potent pine smell from the living room drifted up stronger than it usually did. Then I saw the glow. A tiny light was moving, not the familiar warm glow of bright Christmas lights. A strong flashlight beam. My heart thudded in my chest once, very hard. I leaned forward just enough to see the far bottom corner of the living room. No lights were turned on. Just a narrow flashlight beam cutting sharply across the carpet and reflecting off someone's legs. They were bent low behind the tall Christmas tree. A dark duffel bag sat wide open on the floor directly beside them. For a split second, my young brain didn't know how to process the terrifying sight. Then the figure stood up slowly. Not Santa. Not a person I recognized. A grown man, pale-faced, scruffy, wearing a very thick, plain brown jacket and jeans. His beard was thin and patchy, like he hadn't shaved in many weeks. He had thin gloves on, the very cheap kind you purchase quickly at gas stations. He saw me. Our eyes locked together, and then he slowly put his index finger to his lips, letting out a quiet, breathy whisper. Shoo, Santa's working. His awful voice. God, even now, decades later, I can hear it perfectly. It was calm, very low, almost sounding amused. I froze instantly. My blood turned instantly into ice. I knew I wasn't stupid. I knew precisely what Santa was supposed to look like. He was definitely not a normal, sketchy man with a cheap flashlight and a large bag full of things that absolutely did not belong to him. My throat tightened instantly. Then raw instinct kicked in hard. Mom. Dad. I screamed so incredibly loud it physically hurt my ears. The man instantly jumped back. His eyes widened with shock. He frantically grabbed the bag, paused briefly for half a second, then abruptly dropped it. Whatever belongings he'd frantically stuffed inside spilled out immediately across the floor. Christmas ornaments, small wrapped presents, the incredibly delicate porcelain angel my dear grandma gave us. Damn it! He harshly hissed and immediately sprinted toward the front door. I watched the whole scene in terrifying slow motion. The way he violently jerked the door handle. Music, the way the brutally cold winter air suddenly rushed inside as he immediately bolted into the black night. I stumbled backwards, violently shaking. My legs felt completely weak, like jelly. My mom was the first one running down the stairs. Her hair was messy and wild. Baby, what happened? What in the world happened? I pointed toward the wide-open door, crying so hard the words came out broken. There was a bad man. He was inside our house. My dad flew quickly past us, wearing only his flannel pajama bottoms and slippers, his powerful voice suddenly booming. Where the hell is he? He ran straight out the front door into the cold snow barefoot. My mom screamed loudly after him, but he didn't stop moving. The police officers arrived only minutes later. 2 officers in bulky winter patrol coats carefully stepped inside, their breath still visible as they spoke. Officer Reynolds knelt gently in front of me, speaking softly. Hey, buddy, you did the absolutely right thing, yelling for your parents. You're completely safe now, okay? But I definitely did not feel safe. Not with the back door violently splintered. Not with our beautiful ornaments half missing. Not with the bone-chilling cold creeping into the whole living room, through the crack the man had forcibly opened. My dad eventually came back inside, surprisingly sweating despite the cold. I almost caught him, damn it, he muttered angrily, pacing back and forth. I swear to God, I was right behind him running. My mom quickly put a warm blanket around my shivering shoulders. Sweetheart, Did he happen to say anything at all to you?" I nodded slowly, still crying. He said he was Santa. My older sister Harper was still hiding behind the couch, her face pale as a ghost. "Mom, I saw large footprints in the fresh snow by the window." Officer Reynolds slowly stood up, his jaw tightening. "We've had 2 forced break-ins tonight. One happened just a few blocks from here. It's the exact same pattern. The back door was forced open with some sort of tool, probably a crowbar." My dad suddenly clenched his fist, so intensely I saw his knuckles turn pure white. The second officer, Ramirez, carefully picked up the duffel bag the man had dropped. "He was emptying your beautiful tree," he observed. "Half these ornaments look deeply sentimental. People like this, they just don't care what they take." The idea of someone stealing our family ornaments made my stomach deeply twist. Those weren't just simple decorations. They represented memories, little cherished pieces of our whole family history. And he touched them. He touched absolutely everything. In the days that followed, my specific memory of the terrifying event blurred together. Fear often tends to do that to people. Years later, when I was much older, I asked my mom about that terrible night again. She sighed heavily and sat down at the kitchen table, folding her hands tightly. "You don't remember the actual worst part," she said softly. I swallowed hard. "What do you mean by that?" "That bad man. He didn't run right away the second he saw you. He hesitated." She looked down, like he was actively deciding if he needed to permanently shut you up. My stomach violently dropped. My dad added quietly from across the room. "When I ran outside after him, he was briefly hiding behind the neighbor's big shed. When he realized I was coming, he bolted instantly. If I'd been just 5 seconds slower getting outside, I honestly don't know what he would have done to you." They didn't tell me that terrifying part when I was only 6 years old. They didn't tell me how terrifyingly close I came to real danger. They didn't tell me that the police later found clear footprints circling our whole house more than once, or that our next-door neighbor's security light had been triggered about an hour before I woke up and got out of bed, or that the local news reported a man matching his description perfectly trying to break into another home nearby, and that poor family had nearly walked in on him too. They told me only one specific thing. He was never actually caught. I'm a grown adult now with a son of my very own. I lock every single window, every single door. I check them twice, sometimes 3 times before I finally go to bed. My wife playfully teases me for constantly being paranoid, but she simply doesn't know what it's like to suddenly wake up on the night of Christmas Eve and see a strange man inside your warm home. She doesn't know the gut-wrenching feeling of a grown man staring directly at you from behind a dark tree lit with twinkling lights and pretty ornaments, whispering clear lies to keep you completely quiet. She didn't see the specific way his eyes changed in that moment when he realized I wasn't fooled by his words. Even now, when I step outside at night and hear the chilling wind rustle the tall pine trees in our yard, a big part of me is 6 again, standing there alone on the cold steps, my heart wildly pounding, instinctively knowing someone is in the house who absolutely shouldn't be there. And every Christmas, when we carefully decorate our own tree, I see the empty spots where ornaments were replaced with newer ones without true meaning. I see that black duffel bag harshly hitting the floor. I see him quickly turning toward me, and I still clearly hear his voice. "Shoo, Santa's working." That is the haunting part that never completely leaves me. I always thought the small community of Briarwood Ridge was precisely the kind of setting where awful things simply didn't occur. It was a neighborhood perfectly crafted for the Christmas season. Every December, families eagerly wrapped their porch railings with vibrant red ribbons. Local kids happily dragged their sleds across the icy sidewalks, and practically everyone knew everyone else by their designated first name. When my fiancée Renee and I officially bought our charming little 2-story home back in 2017, we spoke excitedly about raising future children here, barbecuing often in the backyard, maybe even planting a strong maple tree that would mature along with us. By December of 2020, we were nicely settled. We had holiday traditions, friendly neighborhood interaction, and peaceful evenings. Or at least, that's what we naively assumed. But the sobering truth is, You never truly understand the people who reside just 20 feet from your own front door. This unsettling story starts on a brutally freezing night, December 14th, 2020. The distinct kind of night where you can actually see your warm breath lingering in the air. A night that should have remained perfectly peaceful, ideally filled with hot cocoa and cheery Hallmark movies on TV. Instead, it unfortunately became the very night I learned what precise type of monster was living only 3 steps away from my door. Before I delve into the entire horrible nightmare, you need to know some background about the man at the center of it. Our immediate neighbor to the right. His first name wasn't Paul. It was Graham Alderwood, a very quiet man in his mid-40s. His brown hair was always neatly slicked back like he was employed in high-end sales or insurance. The specific type who would nod politely but never intentionally lingered for casual conversation. He jogged regularly at the sunrise hour, drive a totally nondescript gray sedan, and perfectly mow his lawn with flawless straight lines. We jokingly called him the default neighbor. Normal, plain, completely forgettable. But there were specific moments, very small ones, that didn't quite feel right. I once distinctly saw him staring out at the creek behind our separate houses long after the sun had fully set, just standing motionless there, hands tucked tightly in his pockets, totally unmoving. Another time, I clearly heard what strongly sounded like an argument occurring inside his residence. But when I got physically closer, the sound instantly ceased, like someone deliberately hit a mute button. Every single neighborhood has someone slightly eccentric, though. And honestly, I gave the whole thing no real thought. People can be quite weird. Life moves on quickly. Until that fateful December. It was the second week of the month, and almost every single home on Birchstone Lane was thoroughly wrapped in festive Christmas decorations. Renee's favorite custom was to elegantly cover our front porch railing with warm white string lights. My own was procrastination while expertly pretending to check the roof gutter line. On December 14th, around 8:30 p.m., I was untangling the final set of lights when something suddenly caught my full attention. Graham's exterior Christmas lights began flickering uncontrollably. Not a gentle, soft twinkle. Not the usual cheap bulb that was simply acting up. No, this was violent, entirely chaotic, like someone was physically shaking the lights from the deepest interior. The entire outline of the house visibly glitched in extremely irregular pulses. Fast, then slow, fast again, freeze, then fast once more. I actually muttered the words, "What the hell?" Renee stepped out onto the porch floor, wearing a coat over her pajamas. "Did you plug something into the wrong spot again?" she asked. "No. Look, it's his lights." She frowned deeply. "Huh, that's very weird. Did they do anything like that last year?" "Not like this." And just as abruptly as it started, the frantic flickering stopped entirely. Everything went completely still. "Probably just some bad wiring," she confidently said, heading back inside. But something about the total randomness felt too specifically deliberate, too rhythmic in a way, like someone was trying to send a specific signal. The next morning around 10 a.m., I left for work and noticed something else odd. Graham's gray sedan hadn't moved at all. Not in 2 full days. He typically left very early in the mornings, but now his car sat beneath a thin coat of frozen frost. Every blind inside his house was completely shut, tightly sealed, intentional. When I returned home that evening around 7 o'clock, the blinds were still firmly closed. The soft lights were on, but the house looked horribly lifeless. Renee peeked through our living room window and whispered, "He's probably just sick. Everyone seems to be catching the flu." I nodded, but a profound stiffness pulled in my gut. A tightness, a quiet, internal warning. At 9:15 p.m., I suddenly heard Renee call from the porch, "Baby, come look quickly. His lights are doing it again." I immediately stepped outside. This time the flickering was far worse. It wasn't random in the slightest anymore. It pulsed in short, quick bursts, then long, drawn-out bursts, almost exactly like someone banging on metal pipes in a distinct pattern. Like Morse code, but intentionally messy. "Should we go talk to him?" she asked gently. "Yeah, maybe." I walked slowly across the snowy front lawn, the ice crunching loudly beneath my boots. The cold air smelled exactly like chimney smoke and crisp cold pine. The closer I got to his front porch, the more deeply uneasy I felt. The erratic flickering stopped again, as if the house immediately noticed my presence. I knocked on the door. No immediate answer came. I rang the doorbell loudly. Still nothing. I waited, my bare fingers going completely numb. Then the front door unlocked. Slowly, it cracked slightly open and Graham peered out at me. He looked severely off, pale, his eyes sunken and tired, his hair a mess like he hadn't showered in days. "Hey," I said gently. "Sorry to bother you so late. Your Christmas lights outside have been acting really weird, flickering like crazy flashes." "They have." His voice sounded entirely strained, like he'd swallowed a mouthful of sand. "Yeah, 2 nights in a row now." He nodded, a fake politeness. "I'll definitely check it out, thanks." "Are you okay? Haven't seen you out lately." "Just, under the weather, that's all." Something was profoundly wrong with the situation. Deeply wrong. And then from somewhere deep inside the house, I clearly heard it. A voice, very faint. A small child's voice. A raw, terrified scream. "Help! Please! Somebody help me!" My blood instantly froze. Graham's eyes widened just a tiny fraction. Only a flicker before he forcefully manufactured a smile that absolutely did not fit his face. "Good night," he said sharply, and violently slammed the door shut. I stood there in the cold, my heart drumming painfully against my ribs, my breath turning sharply to frost in front of me. A child. A small child was definitely inside that quiet house, and Graham was entirely kidless. I backed up slowly, then turned and immediately sprinted to my own house. Renee jumped quickly to her feet when I burst inside. "What happened? You look like—" "Call the police now." "Why? What is it?" "I heard a kid screaming inside Graham's house." Her face instantly drained of all color. "A kid? He doesn't have children, Ren." She grabbed her phone with visibly shaking hands. "Oh my God." I took the phone quickly from her before she fumbled it and dropped it. "This wasn't something you second-guessed." I immediately dialed the number. 911, what is your emergency?" "There's a terrified child screaming inside my neighbor's house right now," I said quickly. "He lives completely alone. I heard him. He sounded terrified." The operator immediately asked for specific details. I gave them everything I knew. The address, the closed blinds, the chaotic flickering lights, how the car hadn't moved for 2 days. "We're dispatching units now," she said firmly. 2 patrol cruisers pulled up within minutes, their lights flashing silently. Renee and I watched anxiously from our living room window, our heartbeats racing. The officers knocked loudly. No response. They knocked even harder. Still nothing. Then they officially announced, "Briarwood Police. Open the door." Silence. Finally, they were forced to entry, shouting inside. Footsteps, a loud thud. Then a moment of utterly horrifying quiet. I swear those 30 seconds felt exactly like standing right on the very edge of a tall cliff. Finally, an officer emerged outside, speaking urgently into his radio. "We found the child." Renee instantly covered her mouth, tears welling quickly. "Oh my God, they found him." Another officer immediately escorted a very young boy outside, barefoot, visibly shivering. His small face was streaked with tears and dust. He couldn't have been older than 8 years old. My chest tightened sharply. He kept whispering, "Thank you, thank you," over and over and over. They quickly wrapped him tightly in a thermal blanket and rushed him toward a waiting ambulance. The next thing we saw was Graham being roughly dragged out in handcuffs, fighting furiously, yelling. "You don't understand. He was safe with me. He was safe." My fists clenched tightly. Safe, I thought. He had that poor kid locked in his dark basement. What the officers later disclosed to us still turns my stomach completely. The boy's actual name was Caleb, who had been officially missing from a town 30 miles away. He had been kidnapped 4 days earlier. His desperate family honestly thought he was already dead. The precise reason the lights flickered was this. In Graham's dark basement, situated behind a completely blocked window covered with thick cardboard, there was a large fuse panel. And somehow that incredibly brave kid figured out that if he aggressively pulled certain switches, He could intentionally cause the house's exterior Christmas lights to wildly glitch, hoping desperately someone outside would eventually notice. He had been patiently waiting for the sound of footsteps, waiting for a single voice, waiting for anyone, to come close enough to notice the strange signal. He saw me clearly through the small window when I came to the door, and that was the moment he screamed. If I hadn't gone out that second time, if I hadn't knocked persistently, if I hadn't managed to hear that faint, desperate cry, I genuinely don't know if Caleb would have survived another terrifying day. The neighborhood has permanently never been the same since. Our quiet block, which we considered our safe haven, was utterly shattered. Renee still double-checks every single lock at night before bed. I still sometimes wake up suddenly thinking I hear lights flickering in the distance. Caleb's family sent us a card many months later. A thank you note handwritten in distinct childish scribbles. Thank you for saving me. I kept it carefully. Of course I kept it, because sometimes I still clearly see Graham's face when he slowly opened the door. That unnatural, forced calm, that strained, fake smile, that deep shadow behind his dead eyes. And it profoundly reminds me of one terrible, stark truth. You truly never know your neighbors. Not truly. Not ever. And sometimes the only actual sign that something is horribly wrong is a flicker in the cold, dark night. I always thought the Christmas season felt much safer than any other period of the entire year. Maybe it was the abundance of the shimmering lights. Maybe it was the familiar, gentle holiday songs. Perhaps it was the distinct way neighborhoods became softer, noticeably quieter. Or maybe it was solely because when I was still a young kid, Christmas truly meant our whole family filling every single inch of the old house. Familiar voices overlapping, food covering every surface, someone laughing loudly in the living room while someone else intensely argued about heated politics in the warm kitchen. Noise, abundant warmth, comforting chaos. But the specific year everything happened, things were completely different. That was the grim year my mom's older brother, Uncle Rowan, finally came back after completely disappearing from our lives for nearly 7 long months. And I learned quickly what true, absolute silence truly feels like. Growing up, Uncle Rowan was the unique one who always made holidays actually feel like real holidays. He possessed this booming, genuinely infectious laugh, one of those distinct sounds you'd hear from outside before he even bothered to knock on the door. He'd always show up with genuinely goofy gifts, weird, obscure snacks, and random novelties he found in dusty roadside shops. He was never married, had no kids, and maintained no steady job. But he was undeniably the fun uncle, the sole one who made us feel like we significantly mattered. He'd joke, "Kiddo, the world's already far too damn serious. Someone's truly got to balance it out." And he always smelled faintly like fresh cedar wood and strong peppermint gum. But then that summer, he became involved in a brutal, devastating car crash. A massive semi-truck clipped his small car on a highway bridge. He thankfully survived, but he was no longer the same person. My mom explained he had serious neurological complications, which was just polite adult language for he wasn't okay anymore. We didn't see him once after his release from the hospital until that pivotal Christmas. When my mom announced he was coming to visit, the whole house buzzed nervously. I was exactly 11 that year, old enough to clearly sense the underlying tension, yet still too young to fully comprehend it. My dad didn't look happy at all. He muttered sharply, "He really shouldn't be driving. Hell, he shouldn't even be on his own." Mom shot him a stern look. "He has absolutely no one else, Mark." When Rowan finally knocked softly on our door, everything about him felt instinctively wrong. Not exactly dangerous, not openly hostile, just fundamentally wrong. He stood unnaturally still. No bright, familiar smile, no loud, booming greeting, just a soft, almost robotic, "Hey, kiddo." He hugged me briefly, but it felt like his arms paused awkwardly mid-motion, like he literally had to remind himself how to perform the action. At the family dinner, everyone nervously laughed and chatted loudly around him while he slowly picked at his plate of food, completely zoning out, staring blankly into the pine garland draped on the mantel. Then came the precise thing that truly scared me. The first shocking reaction. My little cousin suddenly pulled open one of those small Christmas crackers. Just a tiny, Insignificant crack sound, barely audible. But Rowan, he violently screamed. Not like someone who was merely startled, but like someone forcefully reliving something horrific. His chair slammed harshly back. His hands immediately flew over his ears. His entire chest visibly shook as he hysterically shouted, "No, no, please stop." The whole room instantly froze solid. Dad stammered slightly. "Jesus, Rowan, it was just a small toy." Mom cut him off sharply. "It's okay, dear. You're completely safe. You're safe right here." Rowan's breathing eventually calmed, but his eyes stayed wide, fixed, unblinking, like he was still vividly seeing something none of us could possibly perceive. Then, just as suddenly, he went completely blank again. Empty, utterly silent. The terrible decision. When he declared he was returning to his lonely motel room, Mom immediately insisted he stay. Dad whispered very harshly in the kitchen, "He's clearly not stable. What if he wanders off? What if he terribly hurts himself, or—" Mom snapped back. "He's still my brother, Mark. I'm not leaving him to sleep alone in that depressing room." Dad quickly shut up after that. Rowan was given the spare guest room. Mom gently tucked me in and said, "He's just deeply struggling right now. If you happen to hear anything at all tonight, it's probably just him pacing or something. Don't worry about it." But I did intensely worry. God, how I truly wish I could forget what happened next. The breathing in the dark hallway. Sometime late after midnight, I abruptly woke up. Not from a disturbing nightmare, not from a distinct noise. It felt like something internal had pulled me up, like my body suddenly sensed something that my sleeping mind hadn't registered yet. The house was absolutely pitch black except for the faint street light dimly slicing through the closed blinds. Dad's soft, regular snoring came from down the hall. And then I heard another sound. Breathing. Not snoring, though. Not the noise of sleep mumbling. Actual, deliberate breathing. Slow. Wet. Noticeably uneven. Right there in the dark hallway. At first, I instinctively convinced myself it was just Dad going to the bathroom. But the distinct breathing never moved from its spot. Just stayed there, motionless. Right in the center of the hall. Directly outside the spare guest room. I weakly whispered, "Mom." No one answered. The ragged breathing kept going. One shaky inhale, a rasping exhale, a faint sound like something was severely stuck in the throat. I quickly pulled the blanket right up to my chin and kept listening. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. I desperately tried to gather the courage to call loudly for my parents. But at 11 years old, courage is simply a luxury. I froze completely. I stared hard at my doorway until my eyes painfully burned. Then I heard fast footsteps, not soft, slow ones, but fast ones, desperate, panicked ones. Whoever was standing in the hall bolted quickly down the stairs. Then the back door slammed so violently hard the whole house suddenly rattled. Mom was instantly awake. Dad, too. Mom burst quickly into my room first. "Are you okay? Did someone come inside here? Did he come into your room?" Dad walked slowly in behind her, his face pale. He said very quietly, "He's not in the spare room." Mom's face instantly drained of all color. I stayed quietly in my room while they frantically searched outside with bright flashlights. Our dog was barking nonstop from the dark yard. For what felt like hours, I listened to muffled, anxious voices, the harsh crunch of boots on the cold frost, the loud creak of the old tool shed door opening. They finally found him around 4 o'clock in the morning. Dad came into my room looking like he'd suddenly aged 10 years. He sat heavily on my bed and whispered, "Rowan, we found him, son. He's gone, kiddo." I vaguely remember saying, "Gone where?" Because at that young age, gone still just meant missing. Dad swallowed hard, fighting back tears. He didn't elaborate at all. I didn't learn the shocking truth until I was 26 years old. Dad was dying slowly. Liver failure. He told me absolutely everything during a quiet, private moment at the hospital. They found Rowan at the very bottom of a steep, jagged ravine behind our entire music property. An extremely dangerous area we never played near because of how narrow and jagged the sharp rocks were. Rowan wasn't just lying there. He was completely wedged, his back badly bent, his head stuck deep between two hard stone slabs. His feet pointed straight toward the winter sky, like someone had deliberately dropped him upside down into a tiny crack. Dad said clearly, "I've seen serious falls, hunting accidents, unbelievably stupid hiking mistakes. Your uncle didn't just fall into that extremely tight gap. It was too impossibly tight, too strangely perfect." I softly whispered, "Are you seriously saying someone put him there?" He shook his head slowly. "I don't know what I'm saying anymore. I just know damn well he didn't simply trip into that crevice by sheer accident, in the complete dark. Not in that exact, impossible way." Then he looked directly at me. He really looked at me hard. "And that ragged breathing you clearly heard? I actually heard it too shortly after I woke up. It wasn't Rowan." I felt my whole chest suddenly drop sharply. "Then who was it?" Dad quickly cut me off. "Just don't go desperately looking for those kind of answers, kiddo. Some things simply aren't meant to ever make real sense. He died just 2 weeks later. I'm an adult now. I live completely alone. Different city, a completely different life. But every single December, I think constantly of Rowan. And sometimes when I sharply wake up in the dark middle of the night, I hear it clearly again. That same, distinct breathing. Slow, raspy, like something unnaturally trying to remember exactly how human lungs work. Except now the sound is not coming from a far hallway. It's right outside my current bedroom door. And when I listen extremely closely, when I allow myself to hear past the gripping fear, it doesn't sound exactly like Rowan at all. It sounds precisely like something that never successfully learned how to properly breathe in the first terrifying place. Sometimes the silence is so heavy and thick I can hear the old house shift and groan, the ancient walls settle, the wind scratch forcefully against the siding outside. And in that terrifying silence, I wait, utterly terrified it'll move closer, even more terrified it won't move at all. I always thought the inaugural winter in a newly inherited home was meant to feel almost magical. Quiet, reflective mornings, enjoying coffee by the bright window, soft, drifting snowfall, festive Christmas lights warmly glowing on every single neighbor's porch. But if I'm being entirely honest, that December felt unbearably heavy that year. My parents had relocated out of state following my mom's recent surgery, and I'd remained behind to carefully watch the inherited old house we'd received from my late grandfather. It was a modest single-story residence on Ashbury Lane in a small New Jersey town, initially constructed sometime in the late 60s. My grandpa often used to declare the house settled weird, which was just his old man explanation for every single odd thump, wall creak, and sharp snap the entire place made. And believe me, it absolutely made plenty of distinct noises, but I was accustomed to it all. That December, my girlfriend Leah and I had been romantically involved for about a year. She lived with several roommates across town, so she happily spent weekends with me whenever she could. We'd vaguely discussed the future possibility of getting our own place together someday soon. Nothing was serious yet, but the idea pleasantly lingered between us like a shared, warm thought. It was a cold Friday, December 18th. The entire town had already prominently set up the large, light-up snowflake decorations on all the lampposts, the exact ones that famously flickered erratically whenever it snowed too heavily. Most years I truly loved the sight, but that winter, something deep inside me felt distinctly unsettled. Don't ask me to explain why. Nothing outwardly bad had happened. Work was proceeding normally. Music, Leah, and I were perfectly fine. Money wasn't particularly tight, but I'd abruptly wake up every single night around 3 a.m., not feeling scared, but intensely alert, like my body was anticipating something unknown. I dismissed it as mere stress. That night, Leah texted me, "Lila, do you still want me to come over tonight? I can grab hot cocoa packets if you happen to want some." I replied, "Come over. We'll watch classic Christmas movies." She instantly replied, "On my way, babe." When she pulled up to the house, she was wearing a massive green sweater featuring a stitched snowman on the front, and she held a bulging grocery bag filled entirely with our favorite snacks. "House looks incredibly cute," she said brightly, stepping inside and forcefully stomping snow off her winter boots. "Your neighbor's place totally creeps me out, though. That dude has a Santa inflatable that genuinely looks like it's watching me." "That's Old Man Doyle," I explained. He drinks a lot and forgets to properly inflate it all the way. Well, he really should properly fix that unsettling thing, she muttered, hanging up her heavy coat. I swear to God it looked like it just moved. We quickly set up camp in the warm living room, the only fully furnished room in the whole house. A huge artificial pine tree glowed softly in the corner, decorated haphazardly, with mismatched ornaments retrieved from my grandparents' old, dusty box. Most of the house remained still half-finished. The hallway walls clearly needed repainting. The bathroom tiles were badly cracked, and the small crawl-space door in the hallway never fully closed securely, unless you jiggled it just exactly right. Grandpa always insisted the crawl space was entirely harmless. Just storage, he'd always say. Dust, spiders, old boxes, that's absolutely all. But when I was just a kid, I thoroughly hated that door. I used to literally run past it at night. Funny how those old, childish fears quickly come back to life when you're a grown adult. We sat comfortably on the couch watching Home Alone, eating crunchy pretzels dipped in rich chocolate. Leia rested her legs across my lap, and everything felt perfectly normal, comfortably familiar, and completely safe. Halfway through the classic movie, she suddenly said, "We should really get wine. We only have beer. It's Christmas, though. Beer feels distinctly wrong." So, yes, wine, meaning I had to walk to Ridgeview Liquor, which was 2 blocks straight down the street. "I'll go," I told her, grabbing my heavy coat. "Want anything else while I'm out?" "Surprise me," she said warmly, smiling up at me. I quickly kissed her forehead and stepped out into the brutally cold night. Ridgeview Liquor has reliably been around since the early 80s. A little small bell hangs above the front door, and it always rings exactly twice when a customer pushes it open. The small place always strongly smells like cardboard boxes and sweet peppermint gum, and the aisles are cramped as hell. The store owner, Jerry, was behind the long counter like always. He's one of those specific guys in his 50s who's constantly trying to vigorously talk sports, no matter what time of day it is. "Well, look who it is," he cheerfully said when I walked in. "You doing okay? Little late to be out here." "It's just wine," I said simply. "My girlfriend wanted it." "Ah, women," he said, shaking his head knowingly. "They always want the damn wine at Christmas." I quickly grabbed 2 red bottles and went to the counter to pay. While he slowly bagged them, he kept talking relentlessly about the recent Eagles game like it was the absolute most important thing currently happening on Earth. I politely pretended to listen, nodding appropriately when needed. Then my phone suddenly buzzed in my coat pocket. It was Leia calling. I stepped back quickly from the counter. "One SEC, Jerry." "Sure thing, kid." I answered the call. "Hey, babe. What's up?" Her voice sounded noticeably shaky. "Can you, stay on the phone for a second?" "What happened? Are you okay?" She exhaled sharply. "I keep hearing something weird." "Hearing what exactly?" She instantly lowered her voice, whispering, "Something moving under the floor, near the crawl space." I frowned slightly. "It's probably just the house settling, babe." "No, it clearly sounds like a shuffle or something moving. I don't really know for sure. I just don't feel right at all." She never got seriously scared over nothing. Leia was usually the logical one between the two of us. "Stay on the phone," I said gently. "I'm walking out of the store now. I'll be home in 5 minutes." "Okay." Her breathing was clearly audible, nervous, and quick. I paid, mumbled a hurried goodbye to Jerry, and stepped out fast into the cold night. It was unnervingly quiet on Ashbury Lane. Most of the houses were dark except for the soft glow of Christmas lights. Snow crunched loudly under my heavy boots. Leia breathed heavily through the phone, trying not to sound openly scared. "You hear anything now?" I asked. She carefully hesitated. "Just those weird noises again. Maybe I'm truly imagining it all. I just absolutely hate that crawl space door being right there. I'll quickly check it when I get back." A pause. "Would an animal get inside there?" she asked softly. "No," I said firmly. "There's no outside opening. Grandpa sealed everything up tight." But even as I confidently said that, something deep in my stomach violently twisted. I hurried my steps. When I turned onto my street, Leia said, Okay. I'm going to quickly stop listening for it now. Tell me when you're at the door. I can see the porch now. Almost there. I quickly unlocked the door, stepped inside, and found her sitting stiffly on the couch, wrapped in her blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes were terrified and wide. "Oh my God, thank you," she cried, running quickly to me and hugging me very tightly. I probably just totally freaked myself out. "You're okay," I said, kissing her cold cheek. "I'm right here now." But her hands were still visibly trembling. We poured wine and put on the Grinch. The tension slowly began to ease. She laughed again. Music leaned comfortably on me again. Everything was quickly back to normal until the sound suddenly came again. A deep, heavy thud beneath the floor. Not the quiet pop of a house settling. Not the mere crack of wood expanding in the cold. A distinct thud, dull, heavy, and completely deliberate. I instantly froze. Leia looked directly at me, her eyes filling rapidly with panic. "You definitely heard that, right?" she whispered intensely. My throat went completely dry. "Yeah." Another heavy thud followed, and then a faint, shuffling movement. My heart pounded wildly in my chest. "Okay," I said, standing up slowly. "Maybe there is something down there after all." "Don't go down," she whispered intensely, frantically grabbing my sleeve. "I just want to take a quick look." I grabbed the bright flashlight from the hallway closet and carefully pushed open the small wooden crawl space door. A cold, thick draft rose up from the dark hole below. The terrible smell hit me instantly. Stale, intensely damp, and sharp, unmistakably like urine. "What the hell is that?" I muttered. "Don't go down," Leia pleaded again, her voice trembling badly. "I'll be extremely quick." I climbed down the worn wooden steps, the air getting colder with each step. The thin beam of my flashlight cut a path through the dust. Boxes lined the damp walls. My grandfather's old stored items, Christmas decorations, various tools. I scanned the left side. Nothing. I scanned the right side. Then I clearly noticed something that made my pulse suddenly spike. A dirty blanket was lying on the floor, bunched up tightly in the corner behind some old boxes. Not ours. Then there was movement. Something large shifted behind the far stack of storage bins. I backed up quickly and instantly, stumbling onto the steps. Nope. No way in hell. I scrambled back up fast, forcefully shut the crawl space door, and tightly twisted the lock on it. "What did you see down there?" Leia asked, her voice shaking badly. "Nothing. Probably just an animal. But my dad can deal with it tomorrow." But she knew full well I was lying to her. We went back quickly to the living room, pretending outwardly everything was perfectly fine, but both of us continuously kept glancing quickly toward the hallway. We finished the classic movie. We drank more wine. We went to my room to finally sleep. We kept the TV on, providing a comforting glow in the darkness. I finally fell asleep around 1:30 a.m. I woke up abruptly hours later with a severe splitting headache and an urgent need to use the restroom. The TV was still quietly on. Leia was fast asleep right beside me, safely curled under the blanket. The hallway was completely pitch black. I opened the bedroom door very quietly. That's when I clearly saw it. A dark silhouette at the far end of the hallway, tall, completely still, and distinctly facing me. My entire body instantly froze rigid. My very first instinct wasn't to scream loudly. It was to carefully close the door slowly, silently, which I desperately did. I quickly locked it firmly. My hands shook violently and uncontrollably. Behind me, Leia slowly stirred. "What are you doing, Lila?" I whispered quickly. "Someone's in the house." She woke up completely instantly. "What?" The doorknob turned slowly, sharp, deliberately. Then a man's voice, deep, audibly damaged and raspy, spoke through the door. "Hey." Leia gasped loudly and immediately slapped her hand over her mouth. My heart felt like it was going to violently tear out of my chest. The doorknob rattled much harder. Then I heard footsteps, slowly walking away. I quickly grabbed my phone and instantly dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The operator urgently tried to keep me calm. "Stay exactly where you are. Officers are rapidly on the way. Do not open the door." Leia cried silently beside me, clutching onto my arm so tightly her nails physically dug into my skin. Every single sound in the entire house felt intensely amplified. The constant hum of the heater, the faint ringing noise in my ear, the distant, eerie creak of floorboards. It felt like an absolute eternity. But eventually, police sirens loudly echoed outside. Blue and red lights filled the bedroom windows. We cracked open the door only when an officer loudly shouted, "Police! Come out now." They searched the entire dark house. But of course, he was completely gone. He'd come up from the crawl space and exited out the back door, leaving it slightly cracked open. But the absolute worst part, the officers immediately found something I hadn't seen at all earlier. A stained, dirty sleeping bag, a large pile of food wrappers, used water bottles, and a dark puddle in the far corner. He'd obviously been secretly living there for days, maybe even many weeks. The officer looked directly at me with this grave, grim expression and said he wasn't just passing through. He was actively staying, watching, and listening to us. It made me physically sick. Leia grabbed my arm so tightly her nails dug deep into my skin. We spent a terrifying night at her small apartment. My parents barely believed the whole story until the official police report came through. I never stayed in that horrible house alone ever again. And even now, many years later, I still sometimes wake up suddenly convinced I hear someone moving under the damn floor. I never expected to spend the week before Christmas dressed in a cheap, scratchy red suit, profusely sweating under the bright mall lights, while total strangers shoved their screaming, small kids forcefully onto my lap. But that's exactly where the harsh reality of life dropped me that winter. Back then, I was just 24, completely broke, and frantically trying to rebuild my life after an incredibly rough year. I'd moved all the way from Kansas City to a small town in remote Colorado called Pinebrook. Nothing glamorous, just a middle-of-nowhere valley with a lone Walmart store, a single bowling alley that noticeably hadn't updated its tacky carpet since 1991, and the tired Evergreen Mall, which tried relentlessly hard to appear festive every December, that it somehow made the whole season feel even more intensely depressing. I readily took the temporary holiday Santa job because I desperately needed cash flow to keep my crappy one-bedroom apartment lease afloat. Rent had already swallowed 2 entire paychecks, and I was dangerously behind on all my utilities. When the mall's seasonal events coordinator, Miss Hargrove, asked sharply if I'd be genuinely willing to fill in as a cashier at the Photo with Santa booth, I didn't even have to think twice about the offer. Most days, the low-stress job simply meant handing out tiny, newly printed photos, pretending to actually enjoy the Christmas music aggressively played on endless loop. Sure, it wasn't exactly glamorous work, but it was easy enough. Until everything violently spiraled out of control. There were only 3 regular staff members working there. Brett, the man who played Santa. Nah, the sharp-eyed photographer. And me, the new cashier. And there was one consistent customer who always caught my eye. A local woman named Laurel in her mid-30s, with a visibly warm smile, who frequently wore a comfortable navy coat featuring a faux fur hood. Not flirtatious, not odd, just inherently kind. The specific sort of person who asked sincerely how your week was actually going and truly meant it when she listened to the answer. On days she purposefully dropped by with her 2 young kids, I always felt just a little less miserably lonely. I didn't necessarily have a romantic crush on her, exactly. I just deeply liked the feeling of being treated like I mattered. As for Brett, the older guy who played the real Santa, he was something else entirely. He was older, perhaps in his mid-40s, with prominent laugh lines so deep you could literally have hidden small coins in them. He had this truly wild, manic energy, like he'd downed 3 cans of Red Bull before every single shift. Kids absolutely adored him. Parents completely adored him. The mall management enthusiastically adored him. The shocking truth, he was too intensely good at portraying Santa. Too loud, too aggressively animated, too insanely hyped up. I figured he was just uniquely quirky. But I eventually learned there was much more deeply concerning stuff to him. A lot more. The terrifying week everything suddenly changed. 3 full days before Christmas, we were utterly slammed with waves of eager visitors. Pinebrook wasn't typically the kind of town that generated much excitement, so the Santa photos were essentially a local holiday pilgrimage ritual. Around 4 p.m. precisely, during one of the absolute busiest photo waves, I watched Brett suddenly leap up from the official Santa chair and loudly announce, "Break time. Santa urgently needs to refill his jelly belly." Parents laughed loudly. Kids squealed happily. Na just rolled her eyes, and Brett quickly jogged off toward the employee hallway, his red coat flapping wildly behind him, the brass bells jingling loudly, his fake beard slightly askew and crooked. 10 minutes passed, then 15, then 20. Na angrily muttered to me, "He better not be puking in the bathroom again." But he still didn't return. By the disheartening 30-minute mark, Miss Hargrove stormed down from her mall office and angrily hissed, "Where the hell is he? We have a 2-hour line waiting." I merely shrugged my shoulders. He just said it was break time. Well, we absolutely don't have time for his stupid little breaks today. She snapped harshly. "You." She violently jabbed her finger directly at me. "You're putting on the full suit." I stared blankly at her. "Ma'am, I'm only 24. She immediately glared. "Congratulations. Tonight, you're also acting as Santa." I frantically tried every single excuse. "I'm not the correct age. I don't know what kind of things to say to the kids. These damn boots won't even properly fit." Miss Hargrove shut me down instantly with one single devastating sentence. "Either you get into that suit now, or you get officially written up and immediately replaced." And since I desperately needed that next paycheck more than I valued my temporary dignity, I reluctantly put on the suit. Becoming Santa was an instant failure. Wearing the giant Santa costume felt exactly like wrapping myself in a huge, sweaty wool blanket that had been dipped entirely in cheap, awful cologne. The fake beard itched constantly like it was made of fiberglass. The hat sat ridiculously crooked. The stupid boots painfully pinched my big toe so hard I swear it immediately bruised. Parents instantly noticed almost immediately that I wasn't the original Santa. I overheard hushed whispers. "That's not the same guy at all. He looks much younger. Why is he acting so nervous?" Because I was extremely nervous. I didn't know the proper Santa chatter. I didn't know the correct way to hold small kids without feeling like I was breaking some kind of law. I kept repeatedly saying stupid, awkward things like, "So, what's happening? I mean, ho ho ho." Na gave me disgusted looks that honestly could curdle milk, but I kept miserably going for what felt like endless hours. And then I distinctly saw him. It was around 7 p.m. when I finally noticed a large man sitting completely alone at one of the food court tables, facing directly toward our booth. He wasn't eating anything, wasn't looking at his phone, and had no shopping bags beside him. He just openly stared right at me. At first, I foolishly thought maybe he was patiently waiting for someone else. The mall was obviously crowded. Lots of people were sitting around, but this man's stare wasn't casual at all. It wasn't bored. It was intensely cold, direct, and unblinking. He looked to be about 45 years old. He wore a heavy leather jacket, a black beanie cap, and had weather-beaten skin, like he'd lived outdoors for most of his life. A deep scar cut sharply from the corner of his mouth all the way to his jawline. When our eyes met briefly, he didn't look away. Instead, he slowly leaned forward, resting his arms on the table like he was settling in to intently watch something truly important. A sudden chill went right down my spine. I whispered urgently to Na, "Hey, do you see that scary guy over there?" She quickly glanced in that direction. "Which guy?" "That one. Black beanie. Near the food court." She squinted her eyes, shrugged slightly. "Nope. Looks exactly like a regular dad to me." A regular dad absolutely did not stare at strangers like that, but I tried desperately to brush it off. The cold, intense stare never stopped. 20 minutes later, he was still exactly there, still staring. Every single time I looked up, he was in the precise same, rigid position, like he was a permanent statue or something equally sinister. Then he stood up and walked a few quick steps closer to us. Not much closer, just enough for me to distinctly feel the safe distance closing rapidly. My stomach twisted into a painful knot. I tried desperately telling myself he wasn't really looking at me, just the whole setup. Or maybe he was looking at some young kid nearby. But deep down, something truly felt profoundly wrong. Really, absolutely wrong. Break time. The worst decision of my entire life. When my scheduled break finally came, I practically ripped the hot beard off just to properly breathe. I glanced quickly toward the food court. The man had moved closer. He wasn't at the table anymore. He was standing halfway across the main walkway now, still staring, still relentlessly coming closer. I pretended frantically not to see him and walked extremely fast toward the employee hallway. I could distinctly hear my own heartbeat loudly pounding in my ears. I quickly turned the corner and instantly heard the sharp echo of heavy footsteps behind me. Following, I sped up my walking pace. The footsteps sped up their pace, too. I muttered urgently under my breath. Shit, shit, shit. The nearest available door was the public men's restroom on the left. Without thinking, I frantically slipped inside and desperately ducked into the last stall, my boots loudly scraping the tiled floor. I didn't manage to lock it at first. I was far too shaky, but I forced myself to reach down and violently twist the latch. Barely 2 seconds later, the door to the restroom burst open loudly. Heavy, angry footsteps stormed quickly in, sounding furious. I clapped my hand tightly over my mouth. My heart slammed so violently hard I felt instantly dizzy. The man muttered loudly in this incredibly guttural voice. "Where are you, bastard? I saw you clearly coming here." I stared down fixedly at my Santa boots, the bright black leather clearly sticking out prominently under the stall door. I was an absolute idiot. I might as well have left a clear trail of colorful candy canes leading directly behind me. The man's boots suddenly stopped right in front of my stall door. I shut my eyes tightly. Then bam! He kicked the stall door open so violently hard it slammed forcefully into the divider wall. I stumbled backwards, nearly tripping over the stupid, heavy Santa coat pulled tight at my feet. He violently grabbed me by the collar, savagely yanking me forward, so fast my head brutally smacked the hand dryer behind me. "You truly think you can simply disappear on me?" he snarled fiercely. His breath smelled heavily like cheap cigarettes and stale whiskey. His eyes were bloodshot and completely wild. I honestly don't know you," I weakly choked out. "The hell you don't," he snapped harshly. "Where's my damn money?" "Money? What money? Please, I think you have the completely wrong." He furiously ripped the Santa hat off my head, then the wig, then the beard. The hatred clearly visible in his eyes flickered. Confusion, then briefly something that looked like fear. His grip instantly loosened. "Oh hell," he muttered quietly, stepping back quickly. "You ain't him." My voice shook violently. "I told you that. I don't know who you think." "Shut up," he hissed, pacing quickly. Damn it. If you ain't him, then where the hell is he hiding? He ain't at the booth. He ain't answering his damn phone." He pulled out an old, beat-up flip phone. Seriously, a flip phone. And dialed someone angrily. "Yeah," he growled into the speaker. "Not him. Wrong guy. No, listen. I'm telling you, this ain't the real Santa from before. This one's far too young. Hell, he's barely a kid." My palms were sweating profusely so bad I nearly dropped my own phone. He hung up abruptly and looked straight at me again. And to my utter shock, he smiled faintly. He was missing 2 front teeth. "Sorry about that, bud," he said calmly. "Wrong Santa, I guess." Then he quickly winked. "Merry Christmas." He walked out casually like absolutely nothing happened. Like he hadn't just violently threatened me, shoved me roughly, and intensely terrified me. I stayed completely frozen in that stall for a solid 2 minutes before I could properly breathe again. My whole body was shaking uncontrollably. My hands felt completely numb. When I finally managed to make it back to the main Santa booth, Nah Music frowned deeply. "Dude, what happened? You look like you saw a ghost or something." I forced a weak laugh. Something vaguely like that. But deep inside, I was utterly unraveling. The missing Santa. That night, lying awake in my empty apartment with the cheap heater rattling loudly, like it was actively dying, everything finally clicked sharply into place. The real Santa, Brett, the guy who was always genuinely laughing, always aggressively hyped, always operating on another crazy level. He wasn't just some quirky individual. He was actively running from something very dangerous. And that something had decisively come looking for him. At the busy mall. During the busiest holiday week of the entire year. While he was wearing his full Santa costume. And because I'd been violently forced to take his place unexpectedly, I became the target instead. I have absolutely no idea what he owed. No idea who those dangerous men were. No idea how deep his trouble actually ran. He never returned to the mall again. Not for his meager paycheck. Not for his personal things. Not even for his own car still parked outside. He simply vanished without a trace. Sometimes when I casually walk through a brightly lit mall at Christmas and clearly hear bells jingling, I think constantly about that terrifying moment, that small stall, that wrong identity that truly could have got me killed violently. And every year since that event, no matter where I eventually go, I can't look at a mall Santa the exact same way ever again. Because one specific December night, I learned something I'll truly never forget completely. There are some extremely dangerous people out there who don't genuinely care if you're naughty or if you are nice. They're just actively looking for the right Santa. And thank God that specific night I wasn't him. I was precisely 9 years old the winter my entire family drove out to Maplewood Ridge, a quiet, small town tucked away in upstate Pennsylvania, where my mom's much older sister resided. We didn't visit often, perhaps only once every couple of passing years, mostly because Aunt Lorna's actual house felt profoundly different. I genuinely didn't know how to accurately explain that specific feeling back then. I only knew that whenever our car pulled into her long, crunching gravel driveway, which was surrounded by tall, bare winter trees, something deep inside my chest tightened sharply. Not real fear, not genuine dread, just a sense of deep wrongness. Like the house actively remembered dark things the rest of us had already forgotten. But back then, none of those uneasy feelings mattered. It was Christmas Eve. The crisp air strongly smelled like a mix of cinnamon and dry pine cones. And the outside world looked exactly like a pristine snow globe someone had vigorously shaken too hard. My parents were predictably arguing softly about which directions to take. My little niece Arlie was rudely kicking the back of my seat, and the radio kept annoyingly cutting in and out of static. Honestly, it felt precisely like every other holiday road trip we'd taken. When we finally reached the house, a dark, imposing, old-looking two-story place originally built sometime in the 1920s, the very first thing I noticed was just how incredibly quiet everything felt. No strong wind, no passing cars, just the loud crunch of our tires on the fresh snow. A single flickering porch light struggled visibly, like it was fighting hard to stay alive. "Ain't this place just something else?" my dad nervously joked as he carried our bags out to the porch. "Looks like the kind of house that tells ghost stories about you." Mom playfully swatted him on the arm. "Stop being silly, Mark. It's just old, that's all." But even at 9, I instinctively knew she didn't actually believe her own gentle words. The stark truth only emerged years later. We certainly weren't planning to stay the entire night. My dad had already consumed one too many strong holiday beers, and my mom absolutely hated driving at night in the deep snow. So staying over wasn't some cozy, spontaneous family decision. It was merely the only safe option available. My whole family rarely stayed anywhere overnight, not even with close relatives. But that particular night, we made a major exception, and I wished deeply we hadn't. Inside, the entire house felt much warmer than I expected it to be. Maybe that was solely because Aunt Lorna always kept a massive fireplace roaring constantly. The comforting smell of wood smoke, intensely mixed with sweet gingerbread cookies, hit me right away. Her children, my younger cousins, weren't actually there that year. Her 2 boys were staying with their dad for the holiday season. So it was just me, my mom, my dad, my niece Arlie, and Aunt Lorna, which made the house feel way too big, almost way too empty. We ate dinner, we laughed. We quickly opened our Christmas Eve pajamas, like we always did. It felt normal enough on the surface. But even while everyone else talked, my eyes constantly kept drifting toward the dark hallway that led from the main living room to the unknown back rooms. I couldn't shake the unnerving feeling someone was standing just barely out of sight, attentively listening, intensely watching, patiently waiting. You know how dogs sometimes growl intensely at things humans cannot physically see? That was exactly what my brain felt like that night. Around 11:30 p.m., I slowly started getting sleepy. I curled up tightly on the couch with a fluffy Santa blanket, listening to the soft rumble of the peaceful adult conversations. I distinctly remember thinking, finally, I can truly relax. I didn't realize that the very moment I closed my weary eyes, the house would finally open its own. Sometime much later, maybe exactly midnight, maybe 2 or 3 a.m., I suddenly woke up abruptly. Not because of a loud noise, not because someone physically touched me. It was because the air felt profoundly wrong. Still, intensely heavy, stagnant, stale, like the entire house had abruptly stopped breathing. The bright moonlight through the cold window cut a pale, white stripe sharply across the carpet. My fluffy blanket had slipped down to the floor. My neck painfully ached from sleeping crookedly. I slowly lifted my head, gently rubbed my tired eyes, and instantly froze. 2 kids were quietly standing in the archway that connected the living room to the formal dining room. A small boy and a small girl. Not moving in the slightest, not talking at all, just standing there. They were completely drenched in the pale moonlight, almost appearing to glow a spectral white. The small girl stood slightly in front of the boy. Her head gently leaned to the side, like she was carefully listening to something he wasn't audibly saying aloud. Their small hands moved a little bit, like people making soft, subtle gestures during an active conversation. But I didn't hear a single, solitary sound, not even a soft whisper, not even a ragged breath. It was precisely like someone had suddenly hit the mute button on the entire world. I didn't immediately panic. Not yet, because at first I sincerely thought they were actual, real kids. My cousins maybe, or perhaps kids from next door. The house was extremely old. Maybe the neighbors came in without properly knocking. "Hey," I whispered weakly. No reaction whatsoever. So I whispered a little louder. "Hey, what are you guys doing up?" Nothing. They didn't even flicker their eyes. That's when the true unease finally hit me hard, like a cold, invisible hand wrapping tightly around my ribs and squeezing violently. I reached down and urgently shook my mom's shoulder. "Mom, where are the boys?" She groaned, barely awake and confused. "Honey, the boys ain't here right now. They're with their dad tonight. You know that already. Everyone else is sound asleep in the back rooms." My stomach instantly dropped, so fast it felt like the floor violently tilted. "Then who are they?" I looked back intently at the doorway. The boy and girl had completely stopped moving, and now they were both staring directly at me. Their small shoulders squared, their heads slightly tilted, their eyes completely unblinking. You know when a person stares intensely too long, and the air feels suddenly heavy around you? Multiply that specific feeling by 1,000 times. I couldn't properly breathe. I couldn't possibly scream. I couldn't even manage to blink my eyes. Something inside me urgently whispered, "Don't speak at all. Don't move a muscle. Don't let them even know you can see them." But it was already much too late. They already did know. My hands shook uncontrollably as I pressed the blanket tightly to my face and curled into myself as small as possible. I must have stayed like that for 20, maybe 30 minutes, obsessively counting numbers in my head, trying desperately not to loudly sob, praying desperately my heartbeat wasn't loud enough for them to somehow hear. Finally, when I truly couldn't stand the fear anymore, I quickly peeked out. They were gone. The doorway was completely empty. The moonlight was just normal moonlight again. I frantically tried waking my mom, but absolutely nothing came out of my dry mouth. My throat felt completely frozen shut. I must have cried myself back to sleep, because the next thing I vividly remember is the intense brightness of the morning and the welcoming smell of hot coffee. For many years, I firmly convinced myself I had simply dreamed it all. Kids have wild imaginations, right? That's what I repeatedly told myself. That's what I desperately wanted to wholeheartedly believe until years later. I was 13 when I finally told my mom everything. "Hey, remember that specific Christmas we stayed at Aunt Lorna's? Something truly weird happened that night." She slowly put down her coffee mug. "What kind of something, Turin?" I told her absolutely everything. Every distinct detail, every intense feeling, Every cold, terrified second. She didn't laugh dismissively. She didn't try to tease me. She didn't instantly say I had clearly imagined it all. Instead, she went instantly pale. Turan, I didn't want to actually scare you back then, but your aunt truly wasn't exactly alone in that house. My breath quickly caught in my throat. What do you mean by that? She used to frequently hear things. Footsteps clearly in the hall when she was completely alone. Pans loudly falling in the kitchen when no one was even near it. She said she'd intensely feel something sit down on the edge of her bed sometimes. I stared hard at her. Why didn't she ever tell us that? She didn't want anyone thinking she was completely crazy. Mom's voice dropped to a nervous whisper, but she always clearly said whatever was in that house. It felt intensely young. My skin intensely crawled. Young like two children? Mom kept intently going like she'd been desperately waiting years, just to finally unload the whole truth. She said she'd sometimes see shadows, two distinct figures sometimes, small, clearly child-sized, always standing quietly in the hall, just standing there. My mouth went instantly dry. Exactly like the kids I saw. She swallowed hard. Yes, exactly like that. I didn't sleep properly for many weeks. But the absolute worst part came much later, when my intense curiosity finally made me actively look up the public records on the house. It was originally built in 1928 and owned by a large family who lost two small children tragically in a fire. They both died in the house, tragically in the main hallway, right outside the living room, right precisely where I saw them standing. We only stayed at that house one single more time. I slept tightly between my parents that night. I vividly remember waking up crying uncontrollably because I dreamed of a woman, pale, naked, and visibly covered in blood, silently walking through the kitchen, like she was frantically searching for someone she lost long, long ago. Maybe it was just a terrible nightmare. Maybe not. I never slept there ever again. Aunt Lorna eventually sold the house quickly. We needed something much brighter, she quietly said. But her eyes clearly told a completely different story. Something had been patiently waiting in that house. Something intensely restless. Something eternally young. And that Christmas night, I sincerely think I woke them up. Or maybe, just maybe, they woke me instead. I was exactly 8 years old the terrifying winter everything changed irrevocably. Old enough to deliberately stay awake out of sheer, stubborn excitement for the holidays, but still blissfully young enough to genuinely believe that Santa might actually land his massive sleigh somewhere on our quiet cul-de-sac in Midtown Pines, Oregon. Back then, colorful Christmas lights felt intensely magical, adults felt reliably safe, and scary monsters were just imaginary things that harmlessly lived under my bed. I had no idea that sometimes the real ones lived in the seemingly ordinary house across the street. We'd only moved into our new home on Birchwood Court just a few short months before. Mom always gently said the small place felt sufficiently cozy, but Dad constantly called it a cheap starter house with thin walls and significantly cheaper insulation than a standard cardboard box. Our neighbors were mostly predictable older folks with predictable plastic candy canes awkwardly stuck into their front lawns, with one singular exception. The Holbrooks. That was their actual name. But I only heard it once when my dad checked our overflowing mailbox and muttered irritably, "Wrong mail again. The Holbrooks are clearly across the way." After that brief exchange, they were always simply just the couple across the street. I'd actually seen them maybe only twice. A very tall, broad man with a stiff, peculiar walk and a reserved woman with jet black hair, always neatly tied in a low, tight bun. Mom once nervously whispered to Dad, "They seem incredibly quiet." Dad casually replied, "Yeah, they're the kind of people who probably don't talk much at all unless the subject is vitally important." So, I never gave them a second thought. Not until that fateful Christmas Eve night. Our treasured Christmas Eve traditions were always simple and comforting. Mom lovingly made rich hot chocolate, with way too many soft marshmallows floating on top. Dad predictably complained loudly about the expensive electric bill every single time he carefully plugged in the outdoor lights. And I sat quietly by my bedroom window, pretending I was just looking innocently at the falling snow, even though everyone knew perfectly well I was desperately waiting for Santa. This time, though, I wasn't just pretending. I had firmly pressed my forehead against the cold glass pane, intensely watching the neighborhood rooftops, whispering softly under my breath, "Come on, Santa. Just one time, please. Let me actually see the sleigh." I had never really noticed the Holbrooks' house much before that night, but now their upstairs window glowed faintly from the erratic flicker of a TV screen. Their curtains were drawn open just enough that I could distinctly see a shape resting on the bed. Someone curled up tightly under a heavy blanket. I wasn't deliberately trying to snoop on them. At that age, the world still felt vast and expansive, too big for mere curiosity to be considered a serious crime. I just kept glancing repeatedly back and forth between the dark sky and that faint glow, half expecting Santa to magically glide right past it. I didn't know that specific glow would be permanently burned into my mind for many years. It was approximately 11:40 p.m. I know that precise time because I kept anxiously checking the large digital clock on my nightstand, intensely anxious that I might tragically fall asleep before the big moment arrived. The room visible across the street was still calm, the soft, pale flicker of the TV screen lighting the edges of the duvet cover. Then I saw movement. At first, it was nothing significant, just a fleeting shadow quickly crossing in front of the screen. But then I saw a tall, rigid figure abruptly enter the room. The man, I instantly recognized him from the driveway days, walked slowly toward the bed with something noticeably tight and strangely stiff in his whole posture. I whispered silently to myself, "Is he waking her up to celebrate Christmas early?" But he didn't gently shake her shoulder. He didn't nudge her softly with his elbow. He didn't whisper a single word. The first downward motion was so incredibly fast that it didn't even register in my mind. In the dim, uncertain light, it looked exactly like hitting. Hard, repeated, violently rhythmic. His arm was moving forcefully up and down like he was aggressively slamming something repeatedly into the mattress of the bed. The heavy blanket jerked violently and unnaturally. I completely froze solid. I didn't understand what murder actually looked like. I was only 8 years old. Violence to me was just silly cartoons and minor scraped knees. So, for one terrifying split second, I desperately convinced myself it was merely something else entirely. But the awful way his body moved, tight, furious, and absolutely silent, made something deep in my stomach painfully twist. I whispered, "Mom." But I couldn't possibly pull myself away from the horrifying window scene. Another blow. Another. Another. The TV screen flickered across the room like sudden, silent lightning in a distant storm. It sharply lit up the man's face for only half a second. His expression was completely blank, focused intently, like he was merely doing some mundane chore. The blanket finally stopped moving completely. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just immediately backed away from the window, so fast my heel painfully hit my toy train set, and I almost completely fell down. Then I bolted. I flew frantically down the stairs, so fast I skipped the third-to-last step, and crashed heavily onto the living room rug. Mom shot straight up from the couch. "Baby, what in the world happened? Are you okay?" I was shaking so violently hard that my words kept tripping incoherently over each other. I think the guy across the street is really hurting his wife. He's hitting her a lot, Mom. Dad, please." Dad slowly lowered his mug of eggnog. "Slow down, son. What exactly do you mean? Hurting her?" I pointed a shaky finger upstairs. In their window, I saw him. He was hitting her like, really hard, over and over again. Mom instantly pressed a hand to her chest, gasping, "Oh my God." Dad tried desperately to keep his voice calm. "All right, buddy. Look directly at me. Are you absolutely sure you didn't misunderstand what you saw up there?" I wasn't dreaming. I was actively watching for Santa. I truly saw it. Mom and Dad exchanged one of those awful adult looks, heavy, silent, and entirely full of worry, like an argument that was impatiently waiting to happen. Mom whispered fiercely, "Call the police, Jeff." Dad whispered back defensively, "We don't know what he actually saw." Mom stepped quickly forward. "Are you hearing him? He is absolutely terrified. Just call them." Dad crouched awkwardly in front of me. "Look, pal. If we call the cops about something like this, and it turns out it's completely not true, we could get into serious trouble. Do you know what I mean? I nodded weakly through my tears. But I didn't make it up, Dad. I swear. That was the precise moment Mom snapped. Call the police, Jeff, right now, or I'm immediately taking him to my sister's house until after Christmas. I'm not living across from a man who violently beats his wife. That ultimatum instantly ended their argument. Dad grabbed the phone and began dialing. As he dialed, Mom pulled me tightly in and pressed my head to her stomach, placing her hand gently on the back of my head. You did the right thing, sweetheart, she whispered softly. Dad spoke into the phone in a low, tight voice. Yeah, hi. I'd like to confidentially report something suspicious at my neighbor's home right now. No, I want to stay completely anonymous. Mom and Dad watched anxiously from their bedroom window when the police finally arrived. I sat still at the edge of their bed, hugging a large pillow tightly. Dad whispered hopefully, if she simply answers the door, this whole thing was just a big misunderstanding. But she didn't answer. The police officers knocked again, much harder. Then one of them quickly shined a powerful flashlight into the living room window. The officer instantly stepped back and frantically radioed something important. A minute later, a booming voice shouted, Sir, come out now with your hands up. The sudden shout jolted straight through our house like a loud clap of thunder. Mom instantly grabbed my arm. Sweetheart, get your shoes on right now. Why? Because the police just said they're urgently evacuating the entire street, just in case. Dad muttered angrily. Christ, it's seriously turning into a whole damn massive incident. Minutes later, an officer knocked sharply on our front door, shouting, Everyone outside immediately. We're clearing the entire block. I vividly remember the intense flashing lights, the sickening crunch of the snow under my boots, and my mom's hand squeezing mine so intensely that my fingers went completely numb. We quickly drove away from our own home with a parade of flashing red and blue lights visible behind us. Dad kept anxiously glancing in the rearview mirror, muttering repeatedly, Please let this be nothing. Please let this be nothing. We didn't come home again until the early morning. The neighborhood looked completely like a war zone. Yellow crime tape, multiple squad cars, untouched snow everywhere, except for the boot prints of the first responders. The Holbrook's house was completely dark. No visible movement, no audible sirens, just an unnerving quiet. Dad spoke with an officer briefly, while Mom kept me safely inside the car. When he finally returned, his face was pale and drawn. Mom whispered anxiously, What happened, Jeff? Dad visibly swallowed hard before speaking. He killed her. He stabbed her many times. Then he shot himself when they breached the door. I stared down blankly at my lap. Mom whispered, Oh my God. Dad added quietly, The boy truly saw more than he should have. Mom immediately pulled me tightly against her. Sweetheart, don't listen to any of this, okay? But I'd already clearly heard enough to understand. Stabbed. Not hit. Not fought. Stabbed more than 30 times. The man I watched wasn't punching her. His arm was sharply rising and falling because he was violently driving a metal blade into his wife's body repeatedly over and over again, while the TV flickered quietly like cheap holiday lights. Everything I'd witnessed snapped into horrifying, absolute focus. I whispered quietly. She didn't move after that. Mom's eyes instantly flooded with tears. Baby, don't think about it anymore, okay? Dad placed a calming hand on her shoulder. We'll get him professional help. We'll get us all help. But I didn't speak another single word during that car ride, or the entire next day, or for a full week afterward. People commonly think fear is extremely loud, that it screams or cries or shouts violently. But mine was completely quiet. It slowly settled into me like ice-cold water, slow, relentlessly creeping, and utterly impossible to shake off. I permanently stopped sleeping with the lights off. I stopped trusting strangers' smiles. I stopped looking out windows entirely because I kept thinking, if he could do that horrible thing to someone he supposedly loved, what could anyone else possibly do to me? Every adult face became instantly suspicious. Every mundane conversation sounded like a manipulative lie. I studied people intently like a tiny detective, checking their eyes, the tone of their voice, the way they quickly shut doors, or how they abruptly raised their voices. I didn't feel like an actual kid after that moment, and every single Christmas that followed had dark shadows in it. The soft, comforting glow of holiday lights always reminded me of that specific TV flicker. The profound silence of winter nights always reminded me of the terrifying moments right before the police loudly shouted. The pristine snow on the rooftops always reminded me of how I'd been innocently waiting for Santa. But what I horrifyingly found instead was undeniable proof that real monsters didn't need grotesque claws or sharp fangs. Sometimes they just needed a locked room and a simple closed curtain. I'm much older now. Old enough that the disturbing memory should have finally faded away. But it hasn't, because sometimes on extremely quiet December nights, when the whole world is completely still and the festive lights from the neighboring houses across the street flicker silently against my bedroom window, I swear I see that horrific room again. The unmoving blanket, the pale TV glow, the man's terrifying silhouette. My entire childhood ended abruptly in the span of a few horrifying seconds. And I've spent all these years trying desperately to reclaim the simple sense that the world is reliably safe, that people aren't secretly hiding terrible, violent things behind thin drywall and permanently closed blinds. But some things simply don't ever heal. They just tragically grow quieter and quieter. That Christmas Eve taught me a profound lesson no kid should ever have to learn. You never truly know who your actual neighbors are. And sometimes the absolute worst monsters live the closest to you. I rarely ever speak much about that specific Christmas, when absolutely everything in my young world changed. Mostly because for many years I honestly didn't even truly understand what had genuinely happened that night. My parents kept the raw truth, securely wrapped up tighter than any present waiting under the festive tree. But I suppose that's just precisely what good parents do naturally. They patch holes gently in the fabric of the world, so their innocent kids don't accidentally fall right through them. Back then, I was a typical 13-year-old, old enough to intellectually know Santa wasn't actually real, but still young enough to desperately wish he still was a possibility. We lived on the rough west side of a small Midwestern town, the specific kind of place where winter winds bit fiercely hard and folks minded their own damned business a little too extremely well. The local neighborhood was noticeably rough in certain pockets. Loud, frequent arguments, permanently busted streetlights, and chain smokers huddled outside at all hours. But it was still undeniably home. Our house was this tired, old rental property with thin interior walls, a perpetually drafty basement, and a furnace that clanged constantly like it had some serious, unfinished business to attend to. Every single Christmas Eve, my younger siblings and I slept downstairs in the basement so our parents could have ample time to get all the presents ready. We politely pretended not to know they were the ones solely responsible for putting out the gifts. Still, it was a cherished tradition, and honestly, the basement felt like its own little self-contained world on nights like that one. My siblings, Liam, Tasha, and little Ruby, were already tucked securely in their sleeping bags by the time I eventually came down the long, creaky steps that year. Mom had thoughtfully strung battery-powered fairy lights around the old wooden support beams, which gave everything this comforting, warm, soft glow. The cool air smelled like the sweet cinnamon rolls she'd baked earlier that day, and the dusty, old carpet we never managed to fully get clean. "About time, slowpoke," Tasha playfully teased from her sleeping bag. "You take longer to brush your teeth, for crying out loud, than Grandma does to tell a complete story." Yeah, I muttered back, tossing a pillow lightly at her. She quickly ducked her head and giggled loudly. Dad poked his head, suddenly down the stairwell. "All right, troops," he calmly instructed. "No going upstairs, no attempting to sneak peek at gifts. And if you happen to hear any weird noises at all tonight, it's probably just the house settling itself. Or maybe a few raccoons rummaging outside." "Dad," Ruby squealed, instantly terrified. "No raccoons." He laughed gently. "Just kidding, kiddo. Go to sleep now. Santa's got an extremely busy night ahead." Even though we all knew much better by then, Dad still faithfully said that exact line every year. Some traditions, I guess, truly die much harder than others. I settled into my spot, right near the noisy furnace, pulling my heavy blanket up tightly to my chin. We talked stupidly for a little bit, mostly ridiculous stuff, primarily arguing heatedly about which Christmas movie was objectively the best. I was absolutely right, by the way. We swapped wild predictions excitedly about what exact gifts we were going to get. Then, the ominous noise started. It was subtle and indistinct at first, a dull, heavy thud. Then another, followed by a muffled, distant shout that clearly carried through the cold, insulating snow outside. Our basement windows were these tiny, rectangular, small things near ground level, half buried by the thick snow that had heavily piled up during the recent storm. Probably just some drunk folks leaving Calhoun's, I speculated aloud. The bar down the street was always rowdy and noisy around the holidays, but then came a much sharper sound, exactly like something heavy and metal violently hitting the pavement. Tasha instantly sat straight up. That didn't sound at all like drunk people just talking. Liam immediately pulled off his headphones. What in the world is going on up there? Before I could even formulate an answer, the basement door quickly cracked open. Mom hurried frantically down the stairs, her face noticeably pale, her eyes nervously darting everywhere. "Kids," she said sharply, her voice tight with fear, "stay right down here. No matter what you hear outside, you absolutely do not come upstairs. You understand?" "Mom," I asked urgently, "what is genuinely going on?" She shook her head quickly. Just listen to me, okay? Stay put here." She gave each of us a quick, nervous kiss, then instantly rushed back up the stairs, firmly shutting the door behind her with a heavy thud. We were all quiet suddenly. Too quiet. Even little Ruby stopped fidgeting nervously. More noises, this time much clearer. Cars screeching loudly, men aggressively yelling, and something that might have been a human scream, or maybe just a high wind twisting violently through the street outside. It was incredibly hard to tell exactly what it was. "Should we, look out the window?" Liam whispered anxiously. "No," I insisted. Mom explicitly said stay put. But even I instantly felt my heart violently climbing up into my throat. Minutes passed slowly. Maybe 10. Maybe only 2. Time felt unnaturally stretched thin and slow. Then, the piercing sirens abruptly cut through the night. Dozens of them, so loud and piercing they made the basement windows vibrate. Red and blue lights strobed violently through the thick snow, caked densely against the glass, flickering rapidly like some kind of broken, terrifying holiday decoration. Now we were genuinely scared, all 4 of us. But we frantically tried to pretend to each other that we weren't terrified. "Probably just a bad car accident," I offered weakly. "Yeah," Liam echoed, but his young voice cracked nervously like he didn't truly buy that weak explanation either. We huddled closer together, more desperately for comfort than for actual warmth. The deafening sirens eventually faded away, replaced solely by frantic police radio chatter, heavy, stomping boots, and more indistinct shouting. Then, after one long, tense stretch of silence, we heard footsteps on the wooden stairs, heavy ones, much too heavy to be just Mom. The door creaked slowly open, and I swear all 4 of us instinctively held our collective breath at the very same time. Dad came slowly down the steps first, smiling broadly, a smile that tragically didn't quite reach his worried eyes. And right behind him, suddenly appeared Santa Claus, wearing a full, authentic-looking suit, bright red, fluffy, fur-trimmed, his big black boots heavily dusted with real snow, a massive sack slung casually over one shoulder, a large white beard, rosy red cheeks, and gold-rimmed glasses perched on the end of his nose. Ruby immediately gasped with pure joy, lighting her innocent little face. "No way," Liam whispered in astonishment. Even I instantly felt this strange, powerful flicker of genuine awe, like my protected childhood was urgently reaching back for me one last, magical time. "Ho, ho, 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 ho." Santa's voice boomed loudly. "Merry Christmas, little ones." His deep voice was incredibly warm, like a classic grandfather's voice. But something about it all felt slightly off-key. Not genuinely scary, just somehow vaguely unfamiliar. But I didn't dwell on the feeling. Santa stepped forward, gently bending down, so he wouldn't hit his head on the low-hanging ducks. "Now, I hear there were some exceptionally good kiddos down here," he said charmingly. "And since my sleigh got seriously stuck in a nasty snowbank outside," he winked playfully, "I figured I'd come down to say hello while the kind police helped me out." Police? I repeated the word nervously. Yep, good folks helping old St. Nick get back to work. He reached one large hand into his deep sack. "But first, I've got something special for each of you." We eagerly gathered excitedly around him. The surprise presents were simply wrapped in plain, brown paper. Nothing like Mom's usual festive wrapping style. Yet each one had our names neatly written on it in looping, precise letters. "How?" I began to ask. "Magic," Santa whispered secretly, tapping the end of his nose. We opened the unexpected gifts. They were only small things, but remarkably thoughtful. I got a new sketchbook, something I had actually wanted badly. Liam got cool earbuds. Tasha received a silver necklace. Ruby got a soft, stuffed penguin. She immediately hugged it tightly. We enthusiastically sang Silent Night, badly but with great enthusiasm. We talked briefly for a little while. Santa's eyes kept nervously drifting toward the stairs, like he was intently listening for something important. But he'd quickly force his large smile back whenever we noticed him looking away. After maybe 15 minutes, he stood up abruptly. "Well, little ones, time for me to get back to my important work. Merry Christmas." He hugged each of us gently, a warm, comforting, gentle embrace, and then quickly followed Dad back up the stairs. The door closed softly. We didn't hear much noise after that. A little bit of muffled talking, the sound of the front door closing, then only silence. Eventually, we finally fell asleep, still blissfully buzzing from the genuinely surreal magic of it all. Christmas morning was absolutely perfect. Mom and Dad acted completely like nothing unusual had happened the night before. We opened our gifts joyfully, drank rich cocoa, and played loud music. The terrifying night before felt exactly like a fleeting, distant dream, and maybe that's precisely how they wanted it to feel. I didn't learn the shocking truth until almost 15 years later. I had successfully moved out, gotten a respectable job, and started my own independent life. One night, while visiting home for the holidays, my dad and I were quietly talking over a couple of cold beers. We were reminiscing happily, and I brought up the unforgettable years Santa visited. Dad looked silently down at his drink. He was quiet, too completely quiet. "Son," he finally said, his voice husky, "you're old enough now." He told me absolutely everything. That specific night, while we were safely downstairs, a violent, brutal street fight had suddenly broken out, just 3 houses down the block. Not a simple fist fight. Something brutal and chaotic. Knives, pipes, baseball bats, people screaming in utter terror. 3 men tragically died before the cops even managed to arrive on the scene. Mom had initially come downstairs because she desperately didn't want us hearing or accidentally seeing the gruesome chaos. Dad was standing outside because he seriously thought someone had tried to get into our yard. And Santa. Santa wasn't some random mall actor or some complete random stranger at all. He was Mr. Alden, the retired electrician who lived 2 blocks over, soft-spoken, incredibly kind, always reliably brought cookies to all the church gatherings. He had clearly seen the brutal fight from his own porch, seen Mom standing outside, panicked, and then saw the police swarming heavily onto our street. He intuitively knew the neighborhood kids would be completely terrified if they saw the intense violence. So, he quickly grabbed an old, moth-eaten Santa suit from his dusty attic. He only used it for charity events, and bravely marched through the thick snow directly to our house. He genuinely asked my parents if he could please help distract us, give us something truly good to remember that night, instead of the sheer horror that was unfolding outside. Dad said his voice cracked noticeably when he profusely thanked the man. Santa kept us busy, happy, and safely distracted. While outside, people were dying violently. I just stared silently at my father as he told the raw truth. My throat instantly felt tight with emotion. "Why didn't you just tell us?" I whispered quietly. "Because," Dad said softly, his voice thick, "you kids deserved one cherished Christmas memory that wasn't permanently stained by the world being genuinely cruel." I thought deeply about that statement for a very long time, about how people make vital choices, both big ones and incredibly small ones, that ultimately shape who we become. Later that winter, Mr. Alden sadly passed away. Heart trouble. At his somber funeral, I stood silently over his closed casket, much longer than I should have done. Not necessarily because I knew him well, but because for one single night, when the world outside had abruptly turned sharp and violet, he bravely walked into our dusty basement carrying pure light. A man who owed us absolutely nothing gave us something truly invaluable I'll never forget. A peaceful, perfect Christmas Eve. And every year since that day, when the thick snow starts piling against the basement windows, I think constantly about him. About the honest lies parents tell to deeply protect their beloved kids. About the silent heroes who selflessly don't wear capes. Some just simply borrow Santa suits. And some miracles aren't grand miracles at all. They are just selfless people bravely choosing to be good when everything outside their door is dark and dangerous.